They compared me to every successful person they could name. So I built something better than all of them and made sure the spotlight hit me right when they were at rock bottom. I'm Lucas, 28, or as my parents preferred to call me, not Brian, not Melissa, not literally anyone else. They spent my entire life holding up other people like mirrors I was supposed to copy. So eventually, I shattered the damn mirror and built something they couldn't ignore, even though they sure tried. When I was 8, my cousin Brian made the honor roll and my mom bought him a cake. For his accomplishment, I was there, eating a slice of vanilla disappointment while my parents reminded me that Brian was younger and already smarter. That pretty much set the tone for the next 2 decades of my life. Our house might as well have had a shrine to other people's kids. Brian, the future surgeon. Melissa, the neighborhood prodigy who played violin, spoke French, and got early admission to Stanford. Even Priya, the girl next door, made it onto the "why can't you be like" list after winning a science fair once. I got a B+ in algebra, and my dad asked if I was on drugs. I don't think I ever had an identity in that house. I was a measuring stick for other people's successes. Brian just bought a house. Melissa's already engaged. Priya is speaking at some tech thing. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs in college and still somehow failing to meet the family's minimum bar for basic functionality. The dinner table was the worst. It wasn't even subtle. They'd bring up Melissa's new internship while passing the salt like it was casual conversation, then turn to me and ask if I'd thought about doing something real with my life. Once, I said I was considering software development. My mom blinked and said, "So, like fixing printers?" I knew I was spiraling around age 25. I was in a grad program for finance because my dad decided that sounded serious, and I hated every second of it. I'd go to class, come home, get passive-aggressively roasted about how Brian had already started his residency, and fall asleep wondering what exactly I was doing with my life. I didn't even like finance. I didn't like anything anymore. What finally cracked me wasn't even dramatic. It was a regular Tuesday. I was sitting in class half asleep during a lecture on derivatives, and it hit me. I wasn't living my life. I was living some weird, stitched-together Frankenstein version of Brian's LinkedIn page and Melissa's Instagram feed. Everything I'd done so far was just me trying not to be a failure in comparison to them. So I dropped out. Just like that. No dramatic announcement. No yelling. I told my parents I was switching programs, then quietly unenrolled. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew staying was going to kill whatever spark I had left. Naturally, the second they found out I wasn't going back the next semester, it was World War III in the living room. "Do you want to work at McDonald's your whole life?" my dad shouted. "Brian already makes 6 figures. Mom cried like I'd joined a cult. Grandma called to ask if I'd had a head injury. No one thought to ask why I did it. Just assumed I was lazy, depressed, or both. At that point, I stopped telling them anything. If I got a freelance client, they didn't hear about it. If I picked up coding skills or closed a decent project, it stayed quiet. It wasn't out of pettiness. I just didn't see the point of explaining myself to people who thought my entire personality was a list of shortcomings. They didn't want to understand. They just wanted ammo to use against me. But don't get me wrong, I was pissed. Quiet pissed. The kind of anger that turns into fuel. I started using their bullshit as reverse motivation. Every time I felt imposter syndrome creeping in, I thought about my mom sighing when I told her I liked design. Every time a client ghosted me, I imagined my dad's smug face going, "Told you this wouldn't last." That level of petty kept me grinding harder than any podcast hustle bro ever could. Rock bottom didn't look like drugs or debt or some dramatic failure. It looked like silence. A cold, numb kind of silence. The realization that I could drop dead and my parents would still compare my funeral speech to Brian's wedding vows. That I could literally win an award and they'd find a way to say Melissa had a shinier one. That's when I realized I wasn't living for me. I wasn't even living with me. I was just some echo of the ideal son they never had, stuck playing dress-up in other people's skin. So I made a decision. If they were going to keep comparing me to the people they worshipped, I'd become the one they couldn't ignore. Not by copying Brian or Melissa, by building something they didn't even know how to define. No more trying to beat their little scoreboard. I was going to flip the damn thing over. And I did it with the same people they never stopped praising. But not in the way they expected. After dropping out, I moved into a tiny 1-bedroom rental with paper-thin walls and a broken heater. The kind of place that smelled like dust and regret. My parents thought I was still enrolled in grad school. I let them. They didn't ask for proof. They just assumed no one would be stupid enough to leave a program they had handpicked. I worked shitty freelance gigs at first, designing logos for mom-and-pop Etsy shops, fixing WordPress sites that looked like they were built in 2004, and doing social media ads for vape companies that somehow always paid in exposure. I was underpaid, overcaffeinated, and constantly on the edge of burning out. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was actually building my thing, not chasing someone else's resume. Eventually, I got better at saying no to crap clients. I started picking up contracts from real startups. One of them introduced me to Kevin, a back-end dev who also hated the corporate cult lifestyle. We clicked instantly. Around that time, Priya, yes, that Priya, the girl next door genius my parents adored, left her high-paying job at a consulting firm to launch a product incubator. She remembered me from high school and reached out to collaborate on a pitch deck. We met over coffee, and she casually dropped, "Honestly, I always thought your parents were assholes for the way they talked about you." That hit me like a truck. Turns out, all those years I thought I was invisible, people noticed. They just didn't say anything because, well, that's family. But hearing it from Priya, who they practically knighted at every holiday dinner, was weirdly vindicating. Like finding out the popular kid also hated prom. Anyway, the three of us, me, Kevin, and Priya, started throwing ideas around. First, we just helped each other out on projects. Then we started working on a product that solved a legit problem in the freelancer space. Think Notion plus Upwork, but less annoying. We called it Cordesk. Meanwhile, back at home, my parents still thought I was spiraling. Every phone call was a thinly veiled check-in disguised as judgment. "So, are you still figuring things out?" my dad would ask in that fake sympathetic tone. My mom once sent me a job listing for an assistant office manager at a dental clinic. Said it was stable. I stopped answering half the time. Not out of spite, just because I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with their bullshit while I was already pulling 80-hour weeks building this thing. We bootstrapped Cordesk for a while, used our own savings, did free trials with small freelancer communities, iterated constantly. At one point, I was coding on my laptop in a laundromat while waiting for my last clean hoodie to dry. That was the glamorous part of the journey, according to LinkedIn motivational posts, right? Then we caught a break. A small investor Priya knew from her previous job loved the prototype. He connected us with 2 angel investors, and after a few rounds of presentations, we secured our first funding. It wasn't a massive check, but it was enough to get a real office space and hire part-time contractors to handle testing and QA. And guess what I did to celebrate? Nothing. No posts. No calls. No updates to the family group chat that I was pretty sure had me on mute. I just kept building. Because I still didn't trust it wasn't all going to crash. Because part of me knew that if I told them, they'd either act like it was a fluke or find a way to make it about them. "Mom, I raised $200,000 in pre-seed funding. Oh wow, Brian just got promoted to chief resident. Maybe you two can finally compare notes." "Yeah, no thanks." Instead, I stayed quiet. That became my superpower. They thought I was unemployed, floating aimlessly, probably a week away from moving back home. Meanwhile, I was negotiating SaaS partnerships and reviewing UX flowcharts at midnight while eating expired granola bars. The thing is, hiding your success becomes addictive when you've grown up being punished for anything less than perfection. You start to crave privacy the same way other people crave applause. It felt good knowing I owed them nothing, not even an explanation. At one point, my mom called and left a voicemail saying, "Your cousin Melissa just got engaged. Maybe it'll inspire you to, do something with your life." I didn't respond. Just save the voicemail. One day, I told myself I'd play it back on a Bluetooth speaker in a conference room we owned. I wish I could say things got easier overnight. They didn't. There were bugs that broke the product, fights about direction, and one week where I slept in the office because I literally forgot to pay rent. But Cordesk grew. Slowly, steadily, against all odds. Still, every family holiday I attended felt like a hostage situation. My parents would make comments like, "So, how's your little project going?" with the same tone you'd use for someone trying to sell knives door to door. I'd smile, nod, and say, "Still figuring things out." They had no idea. Melissa would ramble about her nonprofit. Brian would humble brag about working 90-hour shifts. And me? I'd sit there, secretly checking our live metrics on my phone while pretending to care about Aunt Linda's gluten intolerance. At some point, I stopped wanting them to be proud. I just wanted them to choke on their assumptions. And that day was coming, sooner than they thought. At this point, I was fluent in the art of saying nothing. My parents still thought I was one bad decision away from moving back into my childhood bedroom, which they'd conveniently converted into a home gym. Every now and then they'd ask how the job hunt was going. I'd shrug and say, still looking. Technically true. I just wasn't looking for a boss. Cordesk was growing fast. Freelancers loved the platform, especially the customizable dashboard and real-time project matching. Kevin handled the back end like a wizard. Priya worked magic with branding and user psychology, and I took over front-end, UX, and customer onboarding. I also ran point on pitching to investors and managing our small but loyal community of early users. Basically, I was doing 5 jobs and getting paid for none, but I was finally alive. We were featured in a small blog about freelancer-first tools. Nothing big, just a blip. But it got us a few hundred new users overnight and caught the attention of a VC firm's analyst who had way too much caffeine and curiosity. A week later, we were in front of a real partner, pitching the product like adults. It was terrifying. Also, it worked. They didn't write a blank check, but they offered mentorship, press exposure, and an introduction to a second VC who ended up backing us in a bridge round. Just like that, we were legit. Real cap table, lawyer fees, startup insurance, company cards. I got my first salary in over a year, and it had a comma in it. Did I tell my parents? No. Instead, I got a text from my mom one night asking if I had looked into dental hygienist certifications, because those programs don't require a lot of math. I stared at the message while literally reviewing wireframes for our new enterprise client dashboard and just laughed. Loudly. In the middle of a team Zoom call. Priya asked what was funny, and I said, my mom thinks I should clean teeth. We didn't stop grinding. We ran A/B tests, fixed bugs at 3 a.m., redesigned onboarding flows based on heat maps, and onboard our first 6-figure corporate client. We hired a support team. We got written up in a tech magazine. We were nominated for a damn industry award. And yet, one Sunday, I went home for a family dinner. The kind where everyone pretends to care about each other until dessert. Melissa was showing off engagement ring photos on her phone. Brian had just come off another 72-hour hospital shift and was talking about a heart surgery like it was a grocery run. Then my mom looked at me and asked, still doing that little internet hobby? I almost choked on my water. Priya's face popped into my head. Kevin's too. The Slack notifications, the investor meetings, the Stripe account with more money than I'd ever had in my entire life. Little internet hobby, huh? I smiled and said, yep. Still poking around. They moved on. Of course they did. I wasn't worth lingering on unless I came with awards or a fiancé. I think Grandma asked if I was dating. I said no, but I was in a committed relationship with scaling infrastructure. It was wild watching them worship Melissa for her engagement when her startup had quietly failed 6 months ago. Or Brian, who was now in debt up to his eyeballs and running on fumes. And me? I was finally winning, quietly, purposefully. We kept building. We launched our mobile app. We got featured on Product Hunt. We hired a head of growth. And we hit 10,000 active users. Then it happened. One of our enterprise partners nominated us for a panel on tech innovation, broadcast nationally, with a spot on a daytime news segment. The guests? Some hotshot from Google, a sustainability founder with 2 million followers, Melissa, for some old nonprofit work she'd done, Brian, because apparently young doctor saves kid, makes for good PR, and me. I nearly said no. Then I realized this was it. This was the moment. Not just for the business. For me. The overlooked. The afterthought. The family disappointment who apparently just played on his laptop all day. The panel aired live. We each had our 3-minute segment. I talked about democratizing tools for the self-employed, how traditional hiring is broken, and how tech can empower independent workers. Priya and Kevin texted me real-time reactions. So did a few ex-clients. The feedback was overwhelming. And then I saw the group chat. My mom messaged, "Were you just on TV?" Dad added, "Lucas, that was you, right? On Channel 7. Followed by a fucking screenshot of me on stage, right between Melissa and Brian. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom. Then Dad. Then Grandma. I muted everything. Sat back. Let the calls go to voicemail. Opened Slack and told Kevin and Priya, "We're officially screwed. My parents know I exist again." Dinner invites followed that week. Suddenly, I was doing so well. They wanted to catch up. Asked if I could help with a few things: Dad's resume, Mom's website for her volunteer group. Melissa messaged me for startup advice. Brian congratulated me with a "proud of you, man." Proud of me. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I just replied, "Thanks." Then deleted the thread. They didn't get it. They still don't. But that moment, sitting there watching the same people who ignored me now scramble to reclaim me, it was the win I didn't know I needed. And I hadn't even started getting petty yet. The thing about validation is, once you realize you don't need it, it becomes really fun to watch other people trip over themselves trying to give it to you. The interview went viral. Not viral, but enough to make its way around LinkedIn and a couple tech subreddits. People tagged Cordesk. A few minor influencers reposted it. Our signups jumped. And my parents? Oh, they switched gears fast. Suddenly, I wasn't the family loser anymore. I was so innovative, always thinking differently, and my personal favorite, an entrepreneur, just like Steve Jobs. Yeah, all right, Mom, because dropping out of school and living off protein bars is exactly what Steve would have done if he were building a project management tool for freelancers. They invited me over for dinner. Again, this time I said yes. Not because I missed them, God no, but because I was curious to see the show. My mom had made lasagna, which she usually only pulled out for holidays or when she was trying to impress someone. There were fresh flowers on the table. Dad was suddenly interested in how business works. They asked questions. Actual questions. Not sarcastic digs wrapped in concern, but real inquiries like they just realized I was a human being with a brain. "So, how did you think of the idea? Do investors just give you money? Is it like Shark Tank?" Melissa was there too. Her smile was tighter than usual. Brian showed up late, still in scrubs, pretending to be exhausted even though I knew damn well he was off the clock. Both of them acted weirdly polite to me, which was new. Melissa even called my work impressive, though it sounded like she'd choked it out of a hedgehog. Grandma beamed at me like she'd always believed in me, which, let's be clear, she absolutely did not. This was the same woman who once told me that maybe if I smiled more and wore real pants, people would take me seriously. Now she was asking if I could help set up a Facebook page for her book club. I smiled, nodded, played the role. I didn't bring up the years of mockery or the passive-aggressive comments about my non-traditional path. I just let them talk, let them stew in it. Because I knew the truth, they didn't actually understand what I'd built. They just saw me on TV with the people they'd spent a decade worshiping and decided I was finally worth paying attention to. After dinner, Dad pulled me aside, said he was really proud, and then, not even 3 minutes later, asked if I could take a look at his resume. Apparently, his company had downsized and he was suddenly exploring new opportunities. I nodded slowly, like I was processing it for the first time, even though I'd already seen the news about layoffs in his industry 2 weeks earlier. Then Mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was putting my plate away. She asked if I could help her build a website for her volunteer organization. Said it would mean a lot. Told me I seemed to really know what you're doing with all this online stuff. I said I'd think about it. On the drive home, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt entertained. These were the same people who once told me I was wasting my life because I didn't want to work in a cubicle. The same people who called therapy self-indulgent and said being your own boss was just code for unemployed. Now they were practically lining up for my help. But the best part? It wasn't just them. An old professor who once told me I lacked follow-through emailed me asking if I'd speak to his class. An ex who dumped me for being too unstable sent a DM congratulating me. A former boss who used to call me disorganized asked if Cordesk was hiring. I didn't respond to any of them. Meanwhile, the business kept growing. Kevin and Priya were just as stunned as I was at how fast things were scaling. We got offers to license parts of our API, got invited to another roundtable panel, and even got approached by a major productivity app for a possible acquisition. We weren't ready to sell, but the conversation itself was surreal. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I spent more time trying to manage the weird shift in my family dynamic. Every win I posted, every milestone we hit, they clung to like they were part of it. My dad started telling his friends he always knew I'd make it. My mom started sharing our company blog posts like she was our PR manager. They even told Melissa to ask Lucas for advice when her second nonprofit fizzled out. It was like I had become the standard, and they were the ones trying to keep up. And let me tell you, that was hilarious. Brian once asked me over drinks how I pulled it off. I stared at him for a second and said, by being the fuck up everyone ignored long enough to figure shit out on my own. He laughed, but I wasn't joking. That's when it really hit me. All those years of being the disappointing son, the lazy one, the underachiever, they gave me freedom. No one expected anything from me. So I got to experiment. I got to fail in peace. And eventually, I got to succeed without having to share the credit with anyone. Now that I had something to show for it, they wanted in. They wanted me to shine brighter, not because they were proud, but because it made them look good by association. Which is exactly why I kept most of it to myself. Let them fill in the blanks. Let them guess how much I made or how far we'd go. Let them tell their friends I was some tech genius, as if they hadn't spent 10 years telling me I was a cautionary tale. I didn't correct them. I just smiled. Because for once, they were comparing themselves to me. 6 months after the panel, my dad lost his job. Company folded, pension vanished, and just like that, Mr. Stability was out of work for the first time in 3 decades. Mom took it worse than he did. Not because she cared about money. God forbid she'd ever think that practically, but because now her favorite party trick, bragging about the perfect family, was broken. They didn't tell me right away. I found out through Grandma, who let it slip while rambling about her sciatica. Your dad's been home a lot lately, she said. I think he's looking for. Well, I don't really know. I texted my mom. She gave me the usual deflection. It's a transition period. Sure. Just like me being between ideas back when I was freelancing in a hoodie and living off gas station coffee. But the tone shifted fast. The next week, my dad called and actually asked if I knew anyone hiring. Not just in tech, anything. Admin ops, remote or hybrid, whatever. He said he'd be open to learning new things. My dad, the guy who once said coding was for weirdos who live in their basement. Now looking for a job in a world built by the weirdos. I told him I'd ask around. I didn't. Then my mom called. Different angle. She wasn't asking for money. Not yet. But she dropped about 5 not-so-subtle hints that they were downsizing some expenses and taking a break from the country club and eating out less. Which was rich coming from the woman who once said poor people just didn't try hard enough. I waited for the ask. It came 2 days later. Lucas, would it be okay if we stayed with you for a bit? Just until things settle? I stared at the message for a full minute. Then I laughed. Out loud. Alone, in my office. It was poetic. These were the same people who couldn't even say the word startup without air quotes. And now they wanted to move into the apartment I paid for with money from that very same little internet hobby. I called Grandma. Told her what was going on. She said I should be kind and help them through this. I asked her if she remembered the time my mom told her I was wasting my life. The time my dad called therapy a scam for people too weak to deal with reality. The years they spent comparing me to Brian like I was some malfunctioning clone. She paused, then said, "You're still their son." And I said, "Yeah, and there's still my lesson in how not to raise one." I didn't let them move in. I offered to cover 1 month of their rent, just to keep them afloat. My mom said, "We're not looking for charity." I said, "Good, because I'm not offering any. I'm offering a receipt." She didn't like that. She cried, blamed stress, said I was being cruel. I wasn't. Cruel would have been showing up to their house with cameras and reading back every voicemail, text, and email where they made it clear I was a disappointment. Cruel would have been holding a press conference on the front lawn and handing out flash drives labeled "shit my parents said" while I was building a multi-million-dollar company. I didn't do that. I just said no. Which, for people like them, feels like violence. Brian eventually called me. Tried the guilt angle. They're struggling, man. They weren't perfect, but they're still our parents. I asked him when the last time was they ever struggled for us. When they ever backed us. When they ever did anything besides criticize and compare. He said nothing. Melissa messaged me a week later. "Mom said you're being really cold." I left her on read. She used to post quotes about toxic positivity and boundaries. Guess those only applied to her exes. Then Grandma called again. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She just asked, "Do you feel better now?" And that actually stopped me. Because yeah, a little, but not in the way she meant. I wasn't getting off on watching them fall apart. I wasn't throwing confetti every time they fumbled a bill or sold a piece of furniture. I wasn't enjoying their downfall. I was just finally even. This was the first time in my life that I held the cards. I wasn't dancing for approval. I wasn't explaining my choices or defending my existence. I was just me, successful, independent, and uninterested in playing the family game anymore. Eventually, I invited Grandma over for dinner. Just her. No parents, no cousins, no family politics. She sat at my table, looked around at the apartment she once doubted I could afford, and said, "You did all this without them." I nodded. Because of them. And that's the truth. All these years, they ignored me. It gave me space. All the years they mocked me. It gave me fuel. All the pressure to be someone else. It forced me to become someone they couldn't imagine. Someone they needed, but who no longer needed them. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. But it sure felt like justice.